The sun was sinking low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Deer Ridge. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of secrets kept too long. Inside the saloon, Sarah Larson kept her eyes on the door, knowing he was about to walk in. She could feel the tension in the room shift when he did, even before he spoke. His boots clattered against the floor as he made his way toward the bar, every step deliberate, as though the sound of his arrival was a challenge to anyone who dared question his presence. Sheriff Sam Carter, a man built like the mountains that surrounded their town, carried a weight on his shoulders that few could understand. He wasn't just a lawman. He was a father, a protector, and someone who had made more sacrifices than he cared to admit. But it wasn't those sacrifices that haunted him. No, it was the night his wife walked out and left him with a child to raise on his own. Sarah. Sam greeted her, his voice rough like gravel, but his eyes softer than anyone in Deer Ridge would expect. "You heard about the new deputy coming in tomorrow, quote?" She nodded, her fingers tightening around the glass she was cleaning. "I did. Some young gun, huh? Quote." "Yeah," Sam muttered, his brow furrowed. "They're sending someone with a lot of fire. The kind of fire I can't put out no matter how hard I try." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window where the sun had almost disappeared. "I'm not sure I can keep doing this. Not just for me, but for my son. He needs someone to look up to, and I don't know how long I can be both father and lawman." The words hung in the air between them, a confession that neither was ready to fully face. Sarah knew better than anyone that Sam carried more than his badge. He carried the weight of a promise he made to his son, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness. And Sarah, well, Sarah had her own burdens. Being the daughter of the most powerful rancher in town, she was expected to toe the line, to keep her emotions in check and do what was right. But Sam's pain stirred something in her, something she couldn't ignore. "Sam," she said, her voice softer now, "you don't have to do it alone." Quote. He looked at her then, his eyes searching hers as if looking for something he couldn't quite name. There was a history between them, unspoken but undeniable. They'd both lost too much in their lives to pretend it didn't matter. But in the quiet of the saloon, with the last light of day fading away, there was a flicker of something else. Something that, if given the chance, might grow into something neither of them could stop. But before Sam could speak, the door creaked open, and a new figure stepped into the saloon. A young man, barely more than a boy, really, but with the determined set of his jaw that told Sarah he wasn't here for a friendly chat. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Sam before he made his way toward the bar. The moment his eyes met Sarah's, she knew this was trouble. "Sam, this here's your new deputy," the young man said, his voice smooth and confident, but something about it rang false to Sarah. "Name's Ethan Davis." Sam stood up straighter, nodding toward the man. "Ethan," he said, his voice now cold, the walls around him instantly erect. "Glad you made it. Let's get you settled." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Ethan Davis had a look in his eyes, a look that spoke of ambition, of someone hungry for something more than just a badge. And when Sam turned his back for just a moment, she saw the way Ethan's gaze lingered on Sarah. It was a look she had seen before in men who thought they could win everything with charm, but in the Wild West, charm only got you so far. She had seen this before. Men who played games, who wore masks of politeness while hiding knives behind their backs. She knew the type all too well. And yet, as she met Ethan's gaze again, a small, dangerous part of her wondered just how much trouble he was willing to cause to get what he wanted. Trouble that might not just involve Sam, but her too. "Something's off," she whispered to herself, barely aware of her own voice over the bustle in the saloon. Sam didn't hear her, and Ethan didn't seem to care, but she couldn't help but feel the unease crawl up her spine. She had been around enough trouble to know it when she saw it, and trouble had just walked through that door. The young deputy flashed a grin at Sam, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. And as Sam led him to the back, Sarah couldn't shake the thought that whatever came next in Deer Ridge, she was going to be right in the middle of it. As the door shut behind them, the saloon seemed to hold its breath. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of tension. Sam had been quieter than usual, his gaze distant, always scanning the horizon as if expecting something to come tearing through the dust. Ethan, the new deputy, settled into Deer Ridge with an unsettling ease. He spent his days patrolling the town, his smile just a little too practiced, his eyes a little too sharp. People began to talk, as they always did in small towns, but no one could say exactly what was wrong. There was something off about him, and Sarah couldn't put her finger on it. One evening, as Sarah wiped down the counter at the saloon, her mind drifting over the last few days, the door opened, and Sam stepped in. His hat was tipped low, his shoulders slumped as though carrying the weight of more than just the badge. Sarah didn't need to ask what had happened. She could see it in the way he moved, stiff, tired, like a man who hadn't slept in days. "You all right, Sam?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking through the silence of the dimly lit room. Her heart skipped a beat when he didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, staring into his glass of whiskey, his fingers curling around it like he was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. "I'm not sure anymore, Sarah," he muttered, his voice strained. "Ethan's been pushing harder than I thought, keeps questioning my decisions, my way of doing things. And it's not just that, it's the way he looks at my son." The words hit her like a bullet to the chest. She had always known Sam was a good man, a man who cared deeply for the people he loved, especially his boy, Jacob. The thought of anyone threatening that bond, a bond forged by years of struggle and sacrifice, made Sarah's heart ache. "Sam, you know you can't let him get to you," she said, trying to offer him some comfort. "Ethan's new. He's just trying to prove himself. You've got more experience than anyone in this town." He finally looked up, meeting her gaze. There was a hardness in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "It's not just that. It's the way he acts, like he's here to replace me. Like he thinks he's better, smarter, younger." Sarah took a step toward him, setting the glass she had been polishing down. "Sam, you've been doing this a long time. You're not just a sheriff. You're a father. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." For a moment, the tension between them seemed to crack. Sam looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. She could feel the weight of his words hanging between them. She knew he was struggling with more than just Ethan, but with the fear that the life he'd built for his son might be falling apart. "I just don't know if I'm cut out for this anymore, Sarah," he confessed, his voice low. "It's hard, you know, trying to be everything for Jacob, trying to be strong, to be the man he needs me to be when I'm barely holding it together myself." The vulnerability in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten. She had seen Sam at his best, at his most determined, but this man in front of her, the one who was breaking, was someone she hadn't expected. She saw the cracks in his armor, the pain he carried, and it made her heart ache for him in ways she hadn't realized were possible. "You don't have to do it alone, Sam," she said quietly, stepping closer. "You've got people who care about you, people who are here for you." The silence between them stretched out. Sarah held her breath, unsure of what to say next. She wasn't sure if she could offer him what he needed, but she knew one thing for certain. He didn't deserve to feel like he was alone in this fight. Just as she opened her mouth to speak again, the sound of boots on the wooden floor broke the moment. Ethan appeared at the door, his gaze locking onto Sarah for a split second before moving to Sam. There was a subtle challenge in the air, a kind of unspoken rivalry that Sarah could feel pressing in on her. "Evening," Ethan said, his voice smooth but edged with something that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Sam's face hardened again, the mask of the sheriff sliding back into place. "Evening, Ethan." There was something about the way Ethan looked at Sarah, the way he lingered just a moment too long, that made her uneasy. He had that smile, the kind that always seemed to hide something darker beneath. She could almost see the wheels turning in his head, plotting his next move. But what exactly he was after, she couldn't tell. "Sam, I've been thinking," Ethan said, his voice casual, but his eyes never left Sarah. "Maybe we ought to bring in some fresh blood. You've been in charge for a long time, but I think a new approach might do this town good." The words hung heavy in the air. Sarah's stomach tightened, and she watched Sam's jaw clench. There was no mistaking what Ethan was insinuating. He wasn't just challenging Sam's authority. He was challenging everything Sam stood for. Sam's voice was tight when he spoke. "I've been doing this job long enough to know what this town needs, Ethan." Ethan didn't flinch. In fact, he seemed to relish the tension. "Well, we'll see how long that lasts, won't we?" The young deputy's words were a thinly veiled threat, and as the door to the saloon swung open, a gust of wind blew through, carrying the scent of dust and something far more dangerous. Sarah could feel it now. The storm that was brewing in Deer Ridge, the one Sam had been trying to outrun. Sam didn't say anything else. He stood there, the weight of his son's future pressing heavily on his shoulders. And as Ethan left, the unease in the room lingered, like the quiet before a storm that no one could avoid. The days felt longer as Sarah watched the tension grow in Deer Ridge. Every time Sam passed her at the saloon, his face was more drawn, more exhausted, like he was carrying a weight too heavy for one man to bear. His son, Jacob, was the only bright spot in his life, and Sarah could see how much Sam struggled to keep up the facade of strength. The worry in his eyes was constant, and it was beginning to take its toll. It was late one evening when Sam finally called her outside. The sun was nearly gone, leaving only the darkening sky and the faint light from the distant mountains. The town was quiet, but Sarah could feel the storm building, not just in the weather, but in the air itself. "Sarah," Sam said, his voice tight, "I need your help. I don't know where else to turn." She stood there, staring at him, the urgency in his voice cutting through the stillness. Sam had always been a man who tried to handle everything on his own, but there was something in his eyes now that made her heart skip a beat. He wasn't asking for help lightly. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping closer. "What's happened?" Sam hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "It's Jacob. I'm scared, Sarah. I'm scared I'm not doing enough for him. I'm not enough. And with Ethan stirring things up, I don't know how much longer I can keep it together." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She could see the fear in his eyes, a kind of raw, desperate fear that made her realize just how much he had been holding inside. She had always known Sam was a good father, the best one Jacob could have, but the weight of being both sheriff and single dad was wearing him down. "You're doing more than enough, Sam," she said softly, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. "Jacob knows you love him. He knows you're doing everything you can." Sam shook his head, his eyes filled with doubt. "I don't know anymore. Ethan's got his eye on the sheriff's position, and he's not going to stop until he gets it. He's going after everything. My job, my life, even Jacob's future." Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Ethan had been biding his time, playing the long game, and it was clear now that he wasn't just trying to rattle Sam. He was going after something much more personal, the one thing Sam couldn't afford to lose. "You can't let him do this, Sam," Sarah said firmly. "You've been here for too long. You've built something. This town needs you." He turned to her, his face softening just a little. "I don't know if I have it in me anymore, Sarah. I don't know if I'm the man I used to be." Her heart ached as she watched him, the man who had once been so sure of himself, now lost in doubt and fear. The man who had protected this town, who had fought for what was right, was now standing at the edge, ready to fall. And Sarah couldn't let him. "You're still that man, Sam," she said, her voice unwavering. "You just need to remember who you are. Jacob needs you. This town needs you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and wild sage. The shadows around them deepened as the last light of day faded away. Sam's gaze softened as he looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do it alone, Sarah." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Sarah could feel her heart beating in her chest, her pulse racing as she stood there in the fading light. She wanted to reach out, to tell him that he wasn't alone, but there was a part of her that hesitated, a part of her that was afraid of what might happen if she let her feelings show. Before she could say anything else, the sound of hooves approaching broke the silence. Sam turned sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun as a figure rode into the town square. It was Ethan, The young deputy pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted, his eyes scanning the darkening streets before landing on Sam. There was no warmth in Ethan's expression, no friendliness, only cold, calculated determination. "Sheriff," Ethan said, his voice smooth, but with a sharp edge. "We need to talk." Sam's posture stiffened. "About what?" "About what happens next," Ethan said, stepping closer. "I've been thinking about the future of this town, and I'm not sure you're the one who's going to lead it." The words were like a slap in the face, and Sarah could see the anger flare in Sam's eyes. He was a man who had spent his life serving this town, and now here was Ethan, a stranger, trying to take everything from him. "Stay out of this, Ethan," Sam said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between me and you." But Ethan wasn't done. "It's not just between us, Sam. You've got a son to worry about now. And if you can't protect him, well, maybe it's time for someone else to step up." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as Ethan's words landed. This wasn't just about a badge anymore. This was about everything Sam held dear. Ethan was threatening his son, and that was a line Sam would never cross. Sam's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight as he took a step forward, his voice low but filled with fury. "You stay the hell away from my son, Ethan. You don't get to threaten him, not while I'm still breathing." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan stood his ground, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made Sarah shiver. "This isn't over, Sam," Ethan said, his voice dripping with menace. "You can't keep running from the truth." Quote. With that, Ethan turned and walked away, his boots echoing in the night. Sarah stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, as Sam's gaze followed him, filled with determination and dread. "I won't let him take Jacob from me," Sam whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But as the darkness swallowed the last of the light, Sarah knew that the fight had only just begun. The days dragged on in Deer Ridge, each one heavier than the last. The town, which had once felt like a sanctuary of simple rhythms and familiar faces, now felt like a place on the verge of falling apart. The streets seemed quieter, the wind colder, and the shadows deeper. And at the center of it all stood Sam, trying to hold on to everything, his son, his badge, his life. But each day it seemed a little more out of his grasp. Sam's son, Jacob, had always been his anchor, the one thing Sam knew he could protect. But lately, Jacob had become more distant. He spent his days working the ranch, his eyes always focused on the ground, never looking up at his father. It was like the boy was carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders, just like Sam. And the fear of losing him, of not being enough, gnawed at Sam every minute. It was late one evening when Sarah found herself walking to the edge of town, the sun already dipping below the horizon. She had noticed Sam had been avoiding her, too wrapped up in his own struggles to talk. But she couldn't let him keep carrying this alone. She couldn't just stand by and watch him tear himself apart. As she neared the edge of town, she saw the silhouette of Sam standing by the old oak tree, the one that had been there longer than any of them. He was looking out over the open fields, his face set in that familiar, pained expression. He didn't hear her approach until she was almost standing right beside him. "Sam?" She called softly, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. He turned slowly, as though the sound of her voice had taken him by surprise. His eyes were tired, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief. He had the look of a man who had been fighting a battle for so long that he didn't know where the fight ended and his soul began. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet, but there was a hardness to it now. "What are you doing here?" "I came to check on you," she said, her voice steady despite the worry gnawing at her insides. "I haven't heard from you in days. You've been distant." He ran a hand through his hair, looking away as if he couldn't bear to meet her gaze. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Sarah. I don't know how to be everything Jacob needs me to be when I'm losing myself." Her heart broke at the words. She had never seen Sam like this before. So vulnerable, so broken. She had always known him as the strong, reliable sheriff, the man who took charge when everyone else faltered. But now it seemed like he was crumbling under the weight of the very things he had once held dear. "You're not losing yourself, Sam," Sarah said, taking a small step closer to him. "You just need to let someone in. You don't have to carry this alone." Quote. Sam shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I've been carrying it alone for so long, Sarah. I don't know if I can change that now." But Sarah wasn't ready to give up on him. She had seen too much. The man who fought for justice, the father who did everything for his son, the protector who would lay down his life for this town. He was still that man. He just needed to see it for himself. "You don't have to change, Sam. You just need to believe that you're enough as you are. Jacob believes in you, and so do I." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, as if he were searching for something in the vast emptiness. Sarah could feel the weight of his silence, the pain and the doubt swirling around him, but she refused to let it consume him. "You've always been enough," she said, her voice softer now. "You've just got to remember that." Sam's shoulders slumped, and for the first time in days, he let out a deep breath. It was as if the air had finally been released from his chest, and a small part of the heaviness lifted. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah saw something she hadn't seen in him for a long time. A flicker of hope. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I needed to hear that, more than you know." She nodded, her hand brushing his arm as she took a step back. "Anytime, Sam. You're not alone in this." Before they could speak again, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. Sam turned, his expression hardening as he recognized the rider approaching. Ethan. Ethan rode into view, his horse kicking up dust behind him. He pulled to a stop just a few feet away from Sam and Sarah, his eyes flicking between them. There was a knowing look in his gaze, a look that said he had seen exactly what was happening. "I didn't expect to find you out here, Sheriff," Ethan said, his tone as smooth as ever. "Got something I need to talk to you about." Sam's jaw clenched, and Sarah could feel the tension rise between them. It was clear that Ethan wasn't just here for a friendly chat. He had an agenda, and whatever it wasn't good. "I'm listening," Sam said, his voice cold, but there was a hint of warning in it. He wasn't going to let Ethan walk all over him, not now. Ethan swung down from his horse and faced Sam squarely. "I think it's time you start thinking about what's best for this town. Maybe it's time you step aside, let someone else take over, someone who can actually get things done." Sarah felt her blood run cold at the words. Ethan wasn't just challenging Sam's authority, he was trying to tear him down, piece by piece. "I've been here long enough to know what this town needs, Ethan," Sam said, his voice low and dangerous. Ethan didn't flinch. "Maybe it's time for someone new to take charge. Someone who isn't holding on to the past." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Sam's fists clenched, his jaw tightening with a mixture of anger and frustration. This wasn't just about the badge anymore. This was about everything he had fought for. His son, his legacy, and his future. "You don't get to make that call, Ethan," Sam said through gritted teeth. "This town knows who I am." Quote. Ethan smirked, stepping back as he mounted his horse. "We'll see, Sheriff." "We'll see." As Ethan rode off into the night, the weight of the moment settled over them. Sam stood there, silent for a long moment, his hands still clenched at his sides. "I won't let him take everything from me, Sarah," Sam muttered, his voice full of quiet resolve. And in the silence that followed, Sarah knew that the real fight was only just beginning. The tension in Deer Ridge had reached a boiling point. Each day, it seemed, was a countdown to the inevitable showdown between Sam and Ethan. Sam kept his distance, throwing himself into his work, pouring his energy into everything but the fight that was coming. But it was clear now that the moment of reckoning was drawing near. Sarah watched Sam closely, noting the weariness in his eyes. She had seen him like this before, focused, determined, but this time there was a new weight on his shoulders. He wasn't just carrying the burden of being the sheriff anymore. He was fighting for his son's future, for his place in this town, and for everything he held dear. One evening after the sun had dipped behind the mountains, Sam found himself sitting alone on the porch of the sheriff's office. The night was cool, the air crisp, and the sounds of the town had faded into an uneasy quiet. He hadn't realized just how much he needed this silence until it wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. But even in the stillness, his mind couldn't quiet the thoughts that kept him up at night. Thoughts of Ethan, of Jacob, and of the life he had spent so many years building, a life now threatened by a man who had nothing to lose. Sarah found him there, sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the lantern flickering on the porch. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should disturb him, but when she saw the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were hunched, she knew she couldn't leave him like this. "Sam?" she called softly, stepping onto the porch. He turned, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern. There was a tiredness in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was as if the weight of the world had settled on him, pressing down with every passing second. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, but there was a softness in it too. "What are you doing here?" She stepped closer, standing beside him, and looked out over the darkened town. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar, but it wasn't enough to hide the distance that had grown between them. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "about you, about what's coming." Sam didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out into the night, his fingers wrapped tightly around the edge of his chair. Sarah could see the inner turmoil in him, the constant battle between the man he had been and the man he was becoming. The sheriff who fought for justice, but who now felt like he was losing everything that mattered most. "You're not alone, Sam," she said, her voice stronger now. "You've got people who care about you, people who want to see you win this fight." He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something darker. "I'm not sure I can win this fight, Sarah, not against him, not with everything I've got on the line." "I know it's hard," she said, sitting down next to him. "But you've been through worse. You've faced worse odds and come out on top. You've done things that no one else would have had the courage to do. You're stronger than you think." Sam let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "It's not about strength anymore, Sarah. It's about what I'm willing to lose. I've already lost too much." Her heart broke at his words. She could hear the pain in his voice, the resignation that had settled into him like a poison. He wasn't just fighting for his job anymore. He was fighting for his very sense of self. "Sam," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm, "you haven't lost everything. You still have Jacob. You still have this town. And you still have me." For a moment it seemed like the words hadn't quite landed. Sam sat there, staring into the distance, his hands clenching at his sides. But then, slowly, he turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "I don't deserve your faith, Sarah," he said quietly. "I've made mistakes. I've let my own pride get in the way. I've pushed people away. But you've always been here. You've never given up on me." Sarah's heart fluttered at his words. She had never expected him to say something like that, not in 100 years. But she had known all along that Sam was a man who carried more than just his badge. He carried a heart full of regret, full of things he wished he could undo. But she also knew that beneath that there was a strength that wasn't easily broken. "You don't have to do this alone, Sam," she said, her voice unwavering. "You never have to do it alone." Before he could respond, the sound of hooves in the distance reached their ears. Both Sam and Sarah turned, their eyes narrowing as the shape of a rider emerged from the darkness. It was Ethan. He rode up slowly, his face expressionless as he stopped in front of them. There was no greeting, no small talk, just the cold, hard look in his eyes that seemed to say he was ready for a fight. "You've got a problem, Sheriff," Ethan said, his voice sharp and challenging. Sam stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun, but Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. She could feel the tension radiating off him, but she also knew that they couldn't let this escalate into something they couldn't undo. "What do you want, Ethan?" Sam asked, his voice low and steady, but there was a trace of warning in it. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Sarah, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "I think you know what I want," he said, his eyes flicking from Sam to her. "This town needs change, Sheriff, and I'm the man who's going to bring it." Sam took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're not going to get away with this, Ethan." The air between them crackled with tension, a standoff that was only just beginning. "I already have," Ethan said with a cold smile. "We'll see who's left standing when the dust settles." Quote. As he turned and rode off, Sarah felt a chill settle in her bones. The storm was far from over, and the battle for Deer Ridge was about to reach its breaking point. Sam turned to her, his jaw clenched in silent resolve. "It's not over yet," he muttered, his voice full of determination. "And I'm not backing down." The final days in Deer Ridge came like a slow-moving storm, each gust of wind a warning, each passing hour a countdown to something inevitable. The town was on edge. Whispers filled the air like smoke, and everywhere Sam went, eyes followed him. Some with respect, others with doubt, but all watching, waiting for him to make his next move. It had been a week since the confrontation with Ethan, and Sam had barely slept, barely eaten. Every moment, he wrestled with the weight of what was coming. He could feel the town closing in on him, and the fear of losing everything. His son, his badge, his legacy threatened to crush him. But what terrified him more than anything was the thought of standing down, of letting Ethan win. And then there was Sarah. She had been there for him through it all, offering support, a steady presence in the chaos. He didn't deserve her, not after everything, but she had refused to leave him, to give up on him. And now, more than ever, he realized that she was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. The wind howled outside the sheriff's office as Sam sat at his desk, staring at the pile of paperwork in front of him. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up a pen, but he didn't write. Instead, he placed it down and let out a heavy sigh. He knew what needed to be done. He knew the choice he had to make. The door creaked open, and Sam didn't need to look up to know who it was. He could feel her presence, the warmth that always seemed to surround Sarah. "Sam," she said softly, her voice like a breath of fresh air in the stifling silence. He turned to her then, his face drawn with exhaustion, his eyes clouded with doubt. "Sarah, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough to face him, to fight for this town." Quote. She crossed the room and stood before him, her gaze steady, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "You are strong enough, Sam. You've always been." For a moment, Sam closed his eyes, taking in the sound of her voice, the warmth of her touch. She made him believe in something again, something he had lost long ago. He felt the weight in his chest lift, just a little, but the storm outside was still raging. And Ethan wasn't going to stop until he had everything Sam had worked for. "We've come too far," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've sacrificed everything for this town, for Jacob. And now I'm supposed to let it all slip away? I won't let that happen, not now. Not when everything is on the line." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but there was no fear in them, only understanding. "You don't have to do this alone, Sam. You've never been alone. I'm here. And so is Jacob. We'll fight this with you. Every step of the way." Sam swallowed hard, his heart beating faster in his chest. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks he felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. Maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for him to win this battle. But just as the thought crossed his mind, the sound of hooves interrupted the quiet. A single rider, moving swiftly through the night. Sam stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun as he stepped out onto the porch. Ethan was riding into town again. This time, it wasn't just a casual visit. Sam could see it in the way Ethan moved, the cold determination in his eyes. This was it, the final confrontation. Ethan stopped his horse in front of the sheriff's office, his face a mask of cold resolve. "Sam," he said, his voice laced with contempt, "it's time to end this." Sam stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel Sarah's presence beside him, steady and strong, as if she was grounding him for the battle to come. He couldn't back down now, not when everything was at stake. "I've had enough of your threats, Ethan," Sam said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "This town is mine to protect, and I'll fight for it, for my son, and for everything I've built." Ethan sneered, his hand tightening around the reins of his horse. "You think you can keep holding on, Sheriff? You think you can still make a difference? You're nothing but a relic, a man who's past his prime. And you're not going to stop me." The words cut deep, but Sam didn't flinch. He wasn't going to let Ethan take what was his, not without a fight. "You don't know anything about me, Ethan," Sam said, his voice hardening. "You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've given up to make this town what it is. But I'll be damned if I let you take it from me. I won't let you take my son's future. And I won't let you take this town's soul." Ethan's smile faltered, but only for a second. Then, with a cold, determined look, he turned and rode off, disappearing into the night. The battle wasn't over, but Sam knew this was a victory in itself. He had stood his ground, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he knew he had done the right thing. As the sound of Ethan's hooves faded into the distance, Sam turned to Sarah, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled softly, her hand gently resting on his arm. "You're not alone, Sam. You never were." Together they stood there, watching the storm pass, knowing that the future was uncertain, but that they would face it together. And in that moment, Sam knew that no matter what came next, he would always have something worth fighting for. As the sun began to rise, casting its first light over Deer Ridge, Sam finally allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Archives of the Wild West, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.